Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Keshi, and today I want to talk about the 12 classics I want to read in 2026. So in 2025, my goal was to read at least one classic, and I did it. I read Frankenstein. It took longer, much longer than I thought to read that book because I just expected to be able to read it as quickly as I read the other books. Mind you, I'm a rather slow reader, so I did not expect to finish a book in a day or two by any means whatsoever. However, I expected to finish it in a couple days to a week. Needless to say, it took me multiple weeks to finish Frankenstein. And the first part of it, where we have letters instead of chapters, it was really difficult for me to get into it. And I almost DNF'd that book on multiple occasions. If I were 1, 2 DNF books willy-nilly, I would have already, but I'm very glad I didn't because it got into the chapters, it got into the perspective of Frankenstein and then his creation, and the perspective of the creation was just my favorite thing ever, and I absolutely adored the book at the end of the day. It also made me want to seek out more books that were as deep and had a moral to the story or just something deeper that makes my brain ache a little bit when I'm reading rather than just reading very, very simplistic books, especially thrillers that I read a lot of last year. I love thrillers or books that are more simple and mostly dialogue. It's fun, it's great, it's still reading. However, this year I really want to step outside of my comfort zone and read some more difficult pieces of literature so that I can get better because that's the goal in general this year is to just have a major glow up again. That would be both physically and on an intellectual level. So let's start with the books that we will be reading. I will give you one book for each month. However, I might not read it in that particular order because I am somewhat of a mood reader. So I might say one book is for August, but pick it up in March. You never know. I might also not be able to finish one whole classic each month. Some are chunkier than others, and that's totally fine. The goal this year is not necessarily to be reading fast or anything like that. In fact, I want to slow down and annotate my books, actually, potentially write in them. I'm very, very scared. We'll talk more about that later. But I do want to slow down and really interact with the book and experience it on a much deeper level. So let's get started with it. I will say that I get most of my books from, if it's not from the library, it's from Book Outlet. I will leave the link in the description below, but I highly recommend it. You get new books for a fraction of the price. I believe some of them have very minor defects to it. Maybe that's why you get it for such a cheaper price, but a lot of those books I got for $11, if not less. So it's incredible. I love it. And they don't actually take that long to come. So it's amazing. So we'll start with January, obviously. And January's read is Jane Eyre. So I'm currently reading that one. Again, it's going pretty slow. I'm on page 48 and it is January 10th today. So I don't know how much I will get to finish or if I will get to finish it in January. However, I would like to. And I was reading a different book, if not two, before that one. So I might be able to finish it. Have a very busy year in general, I would say that. So the goal was to read as much as I can. It's just that I feel like this year my time will really feel like it's limited. So I'll be reading in whatever time I can. I am trying to minimize doom scrolling. I'm really, really trying to avoid it. I do give myself some time every day to just be on Instagram or TikTok and do doom scroll, but maybe just 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes every day. And that's it. Not more than that. Other than that, I'm listening to an educational podcast, watching an educational YouTube video, or it doesn't have to be anything that deep, but just not doom scrolling, or I would be reading. And I used to want to read a full chapter at a time. Now it's totally fine. I will just read a couple sentences or a couple chapters at a time if I'm waiting for something or if I just have a little bit of time, even if it's 5 minutes. And I might start adding just a sticky note or a sticky tab like this to where I am so that I don't always read the same paragraph. Because if I open it on this page here, I tend to just start from the top. So if I were to only read a couple of sentences, I keep reading the same thing over and over again unless I sit down and read for longer. So I will be using a method to not do that and actually progress in my book. But anyway, that was a very long introduction or preamble. But the first book I'm reading is Jane Eyre, and I am very into it and very excited to continue. It's not anything that I think is that difficult to read. And at the same time, it has beautiful prose. I got this one at a secondhand store for $4, which made it a lot easier to start annotating. Those that look like very beautiful copies, even if they didn't cost me that much money, sometimes I don't want to write directly in them. So we'll talk more about other ways to annotate later. But for now, let's get back to what I'll be reading in February. After Jane Eyre, which seems like it would be pretty simple and light the whole way through, I wanted something much more challenging, and that would be Crime and Punishment. I am definitely intimidated by this book, almost scared, I would say. Not only is it a pretty chunky book, but I have heard that it's not the easiest to read, and quite some people have put it down multiple times when trying to read it. I will try to not do that. One of the advice I got about this book, but just maybe classics in general, is to have a little bit of a note-taking system, including jotting down the characters so that you understand them. I believe I heard that this one has a lot of characters, all with Russian names, so they might be difficult to keep track of. Or it might be Anna Karenina that has a lot of characters that is difficult to keep track of. Maybe both of them. I don't quite remember, but I will be doing a little bit of a map of the people, as well as just notes in general throughout. I do want to do a little bit of an analysis at the end as well, potentially a little essay on at least one major point or topic or aspect of this book, and maybe I will do that with all the classics that I end up reading this year. I forgot to say that my base goal, I guess, or if I'm not able to read one classic a month, especially something like this one, is to read 5 classics this year. So if I'm able to read 5 classics this year, that's a win in my books. But you know what we say, shoot for the moon. If you miss, you're going to land among stars. So I'll be reading Crime and Punishment in February. Although I am intimidated by this book, I am very excited to start it. So it will be interesting for sure. And then after that, I will probably want something a little bit lighter again. And that will be the perfect time to restart The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which I wanted to read last year. I forgot to say the names of the authors. So I'm going to go back a little bit. So Jane Eyre is by Charlotte Bronte. Crime and Punishment is by, what's his first name? Oh, he doesn't go by first name, but it's by Dostoevsky. And then The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is by Mark Twain. So this one I started last year. I had liked it. It was pretty funny to start about these kids who, the way they talk is just interesting and kid-like, and it's just pretty funny. However, I believe I was reading that at the same time as Frankenstein and also trying to finish those to read Dracula. Anyway, so I only read Frankenstein last year, like I said, but it was just wrong timing for that one. So I just put it down and never picked it back up for some reason, but I'm excited to do it this year. So let's just say that's March. And then April, a book that I'm very, very excited to be reading. However, I might even pick it up before, is Moby Dick. So very excited to read that one. Actually, those that I'm most excited to read, I'm also the most intimidated by because they're chunky again, and because I heard that they are books that people tend to start reading and put down or just have more trouble reading compared to Jane Eyre and Pride and Prejudice and things like that. The reason I have this for April is that I want to give my fiance enough time to read this because I gifted this to him and it's still in its little wrapped state. So obviously that would be rude of me to just gift him something and start reading it myself first. But when he's done, he wanted to read this, which is why I got it as a gift, not just because I wanted to read it. But he talked about it quite a bit and on multiple occasions asked if we had the book at home because at some point I got a bunch of classics, but we didn't. So yeah, I got this as one of his Christmas presents, and I think he's going to be reading it in January. I believe. If so, I could potentially start that in February, although I do want to start Crime and Punishment too. So we'll see. I do like to read things around the same time that he does so that we can talk about it, even though I guess he'll talk about it after. But what I mean is he would not want to give me spoilers, or I would not want him to give me spoilers when he's trying to talk about it. So if I read it shortly after, then we can have all the discussion in the world about our books. And I love doing that. So I will be reading Moby Dick either in February or in April or just any time that he's done reading it, honestly. Could be January, and maybe I'm done Jane Eyre and I move on to that one. But I also have other books on my TBR for this year that's now classics, so I don't know if I'll get to any of those. We shall see. Probably as audiobooks. But after April, so that would be May. So for May, I have Hamlet on the list right now by Shakespeare, obviously. And I have not read Hamlet. I actually have no idea what it's about. I feel like that's just a lack of culture on my part. And everybody else probably knows what it's about, but I don't even want to look it up because I want to go and figure it out by myself. I am extremely excited to be reading Shakespeare. And this is actually in terms of the plays, I believe. Yeah, it is the plays. So, in terms of, yeah, so it says Act 3, Scene 2, or things like that. So, that's awesome because I read Tales from Shakespeare for school, and I believe they were just as short stories rather than plays. So, I do want to read it as the plays. I will say, I think I like some other edition more than the one that I got most books in. So I got most of the books in the Folger edition, which was recommended to me, but the No Fear edition, which I have Macbeth in, looks like it's more right up my alley, but we'll figure it out. I'll enter all of it. Doesn't matter that much. Yes, so that will be my May potentially read. And then in June, so June and July will be short reading months for me because my brother's getting married in June and I'm flying over to Edmonton for that one. And I'm getting married in July. I will probably only have 1 to 2 weeks in June to be reading and 1 to 2 weeks in July. So the two books that I have are small. The one in June, I have Lord of the Flies. I'm not 100% sure if this is classified as a classic, but I believe so. I tried to look it up and it says it seems to be. So I will be reading Lord of the Flies in June again because it's a small one. I know what it's about and I know it's very dark. So hopefully it will not be putting a damper on things. Maybe I will not be reading that at that point. Maybe I'll be reading it the beginning of June and then have something light after. I'm not entirely sure. But for July, I want to read Pride and Prejudice. I don't have Pride and Prejudice with me right now. However, I believe that it's not a super chunky book. Again, I've never owned it, so I'm not 100% sure, but I'm hoping it's not a super chunky book. I'm just assuming it's as big as Jane Eyre, but that will be a light-hearted read for me to have in July. In August, then we start back with a very chunky book, or books, maybe I need to say, but that's the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer. So again, I don't know if that needs to be counted as two books. So maybe that's fine that I read it in August and September. It might take me August and September anyway because it's again a chunky book. It doesn't even say, oh, it's around 800 pages, so 768. I don't know if I can I don't know if I can read 800 pages of a classic book in 1 month, but that might take me August and September. However, if I'm able to read that in just 1 month by some miracle, then I do absolutely want to read Macbeth next. And that would have been in September. Or now that I'm thinking back about Lord of the Flies, maybe I will read that in September and Macbeth in June. Maybe May, June will just be Shakespeare things. Because Lord of the Flies might be a little too dark for just reading it before two weddings. However, Macbeth, I know what it's about. I've read it before. and I absolutely love the prophecy in it. And I found myself using that example in conversation a couple of times recently, which prompted me to want to go and read it again because I could not remember exactly what the prophecy said, word for word, obviously. But also, I could not remember the exact context. So I had a brief idea of what it was. But again, it's been years since I read it, and I wanted to jump back into it and read the play. So I will be taking notes, potentially extensive notes. I don't know how extensive, but I will be taking notes on those Shakespeare books as well. And then October is spooky season. And since I already read Frankenstein last time, I have to read Dracula this time around. Again, I have, I think, a good idea of what Dracula is about, but I think it will be one of those instances of me thinking I know what the story is about and being wrong. So obviously it's about the vampire, but I don't know much more than that about Dracula. I'm going to be totally honest. And I thought I knew more about Frankenstein than I actually did when I ended up reading it. For example, I thought the monster was named Frankenstein, and I don't think I'm the only one to think that, but the monster or creation doesn't really have a name at all in the book. Anyway, so that was embarrassing on my part, but Dracula, again, very excited to dive into this. Well, in October, but I think that's going to be a very interesting read. I wonder how spooky it will actually be. Not sure. Then in November, I want to read L'Avare by Molière. So I want to read at least two French books today. But as you can see from that list of books, I didn't have a French one until now. And I have another book for December. So I probably won't get to two French books unless I can read more than one classic in a month. I don't know. Maybe the month where I have the Shakespeare plays, I can see myself reading something else at the same time and finishing something else because I don't know why. I just think I can. But I do want to read two French pieces of literature in French this year. If you don't know, French is my second language and English is my third language. So I'm supposed to know French more than I know English. Mauritian Creole is my first language, if you wanted to know. But for some reason, I never read in French, especially now that I'm not in school and have French literature anymore. And by school, I mean high school, because I didn't read any French books in university either. So the last time I read a French book was in high school. That's crazy and unacceptable. So I will be reading L'Avare by Molière, which is a book that I had read for school at that point, but I remember loving it. And I do want to revisit books that I read for school because I did not appreciate it as much when I was reading for class. It just felt forced. And obviously, it was just, things you had to do for homework and not having the time to do it properly and not really enjoying it that much. But I do remember enjoying it overall as a story compared to some others. So I will be rereading that one. I also remember it to be a tiny book. I might be wrong on that, but it looks like it would be a tiny book. Anyway, so I will read that. And then if I do have the time and opportunity to get that next one at some point during the year, I will also want to read Les Miserables, also in French. We'll see if that happens. No promise. And then The Count of Monte Cristo. I did not actually realize that that was from a French author. So is that originally in French? I don't even know. But I believe that's a 1,200-page book. So I don't know if I want to read a 1,200-page book in French, especially since, like I said, I'm very not used to reading in French quite so much anymore. Maybe I will like it. So let's just start with the two other books in French first and then potentially get to that one. I do want to read The Count of Monte Cristo at some point, potentially next year, as well as Anna Karenina, but I just don't know if I'm going to be reading that in English or French. So we'll see. And then in December, I want to read A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I think that's a perfect time to read it. And I think that's a perfect book to read in December. So that's a no-brainer. And I haven't read it yet. I actually haven't even watched the movie either. So I will read and then I'll watch the movie. And then I have a bonus book, 1984 by George Orwell, that I want to read at some point this year. But I'm not that excited for it. I've heard that it's a pretty difficult book to also read, despite it not being long at all. I've read Animal Farm and loved it. I've actually read it twice at least. But from what I understand, Animal Farm is an easy read, whereas 1984 is not. I do like the aspect of it being an allegory for something else, but I do think I will like it. Question mark? I'm not sure, but we'll see. But just in general, that's my 2026 classics TBR, or the 12, well, I guess it's 13 books that I plan to read in 2026. Again, I might only get to a couple of these books, at least 5 ideally, but maybe I will end up getting closer to that 12 number. Not rushing reading this year. It's just taking it slow, annotating it, really engaging with the book, but also reading more is a goal that I have in general. So I'm still trying to find a way to be able to balance those out of not just having a goal in terms of book number or even page number, because some books are harder to read than others, but just in general to read more on a day to day basis, but not feel rushed when reading or not speed reading any books. But yeah, that's the classics for this year. Please give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.